Hello everybody and welcome to my series of macro lessons. These short lessons will focus on common errors that are often made when writing literature essays and will give you advice and guidance on how to fix them. Today we're going to be looking at developing your responses by making purposeful links to context, the effect on the reader, and author intention. Okay, so let's have a look at what the problem is. So the problem is that when you use context, sometimes it seems like an afterthought or it doesn't really add anything to your response. It's not clear how it helps to develop your idea, and it's just kind of tagged on the end of your paragraph. Your links to the effect on the reader or the audience seem vague or they seem brief. Your links to the author intention don't really add anything to your response, or they seem random or vague, or they seem underdeveloped. And throughout you've just got lots of repetition rather than development. So maybe you say the same thing about the effect on the reader and you say the same thing in relation to what you think the author intention is. So we're going to be looking at three things today. We're going to be looking at how actually all these three things can be tied together: your context, your effect on the reader or the audience, and your author intention. So our first example shows an error in terms of context, and as you will see, it's merely kind of bolted on the end. It's not really securely been used to develop any of the ideas, and this is taken from Arthur Miller's The Crucible. So we have Miller presents a powerful scene by showing how much tension is created by the arrival of the Putnams. This can be seen as soon as Mrs. Putnam enters Act 1 and exclaims that the situation is a marvel and a stroke of hell upon Paris. The use of contrasting language powerfully introduces the idea that Mrs. Putnam is taking pleasure in the current events and is there to exacerbate the situation rather than support Paris. The use of the noun marvel reinforces the excitement that Mrs. Putnam feels at the prospect of Paris being at the centre of the witchcraft scandal. In addition, Miller's use of the word hell in the following sentence not only seems disjointed as it is juxtaposed with marvel, but it also shows how desperate Mrs. Putnam is to enforce the idea that Paris is cursed. She chooses the word hell as she knows that this word is very powerful and holds negative connotations for the residents of Salem. This is effective as the villagers of Salem are very religious. Now, whilst we have lots of fantastic analysis, many purposeful comments here, we have a slight reference to context at the end in this reference to religion. So it's slight, it touches the surface, but it just remains superficial. So really we want to develop this to show how this piece of context further helps to interpret the meaning that we've already started to analyse. So I'm not going to read all of it again, I'm just going to show you how we've taken this one bit of contextual information and we have made it better. So in order to make it better, we followed the two-step approach here. So if you imagine somebody stepping up 2 steps, we've embedded the context. So it's now part of the actual paragraph, and also we've linked it to author intention. That's the two-step approach. So we've tied everything in together and we've made it relevant. So the solution here to many of your problems is only use context if it's relevant. And if you have used it, make sure that you use it where it's necessary. So context doesn't always need to come at the end of a paragraph. And you can link your context to many different things to make it seem more purposeful. You can link your context to the effect on the reader and the author intention of a way of ensuring that it is meaningful, purposeful. And you can link your comments on the effect of the reader, audience, and author intention to your evidence, your idea, your analysis, or the essay question. And you'll see that that's what's happened here, is everything is linked back to actually what's being analysed and the point that's being made. So we'll see what we can do if this is effective as the villagers of Salem are very religious. The villagers in Salem are extremely religious, and any mention of hell would have created fear and panic. Therefore, her use of this negative religious language as soon as she enters shows how she's trying to manipulate the situation and how it is viewed by others. So we've developed this idea of them being religious and then said what the effect is of what Mrs. Putnam says. So we've tied it back to the example that's been used. So we're making this contextual comment relevant. Now we're going to link it further to the context in which Miller was writing the play. The panic and fear created here is reminiscent of that created during the Red Scare in the 1950s, one which Miller would have been very familiar with. By recreating such a tense and fearful atmosphere, Miller is able to expertly transport his audience not only to the Salem witch trials, but he is also able to create a very real link to the events of his day. So now this is where our two-step approach comes in. So we have linked the context to author intention. In addition, through the character of Mrs. Putnam, Miller is able to inadvertently challenge the motives of those who seek to persecute others. So again, this is Miller's intention, what he's trying to do, and his message. So see how the two-step approach has enabled us to not just merely bolt context onto the end, just to tag it on, but to make it purposeful, link it to the examples, and then quickly go from your context expertly into Miller's intention. So let's have a look at our second example, and this error example is showing you an error in how context and the effect of the audience have been used, and this has been taken from a larger essay on Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Whilst Capulet continues to see Juliet as a flower, the use of a metaphor shows that his main grief is perhaps directed towards the death of Paris's marriage. Shakespeare uses this metaphor as a way of presenting Juliet as passive through the verb deflowered. This emphasises the loss of the flower-like quality which Capulet had previously revered. Furthermore, death is personified here to show Capulet's distress at his loss and to dramatise his emotions. Shakespeare purposely presents Capulet as a father who feels both he and his future son-in-law have been cheated by death and robbed of a prize. This attitude would be shocking to the audience and they would feel surprised. In the Elizabethan era, women were possessions that were handed merely from father to husband. Now, what we have here is we do have some focus here on author intention up here. So Shakespeare uses a metaphor as a way of presenting her, so that's what he's intending to do. But then when we get down to the effect on the audience and the context, again the context just seems bolted on. It's not clear how the audience being shocked is linked to women were possessions that were handed merely from father to husband. So not only do these two kind of float separately within this paragraph, it's not entirely clear how you can use this to develop the analysis or the interpretation of the evidence that we already have. So what attitude would be shocking to the audience? Which audience are we talking about? Are we talking about an Elizabethan audience? Are we talking about a modern audience? So there are a lot of questions here, and there's a lot of kind of vague statements that we want to really make a lot more secure. So how have we fixed it? Move the context to where it adds more value. Again, it does not need to be at the end of a paragraph, and linked it to the analysis. Also develop the effect on the audience by linking to author intention, which is where we've got our three-step approach. Context, effect on audience, author intention, we have three things. And also just using the author's name throughout is really useful in showing that you are talking about author intention. So we'll just move down to where it's been fixed. This emphasises the loss of the flower-like quality which Capulet had previously revered, and seeks to further highlight the fact that in the Elizabethan era, women were possessions that were handed merely from father to husband. So we've now clearly linked it into this idea of it highlighting something. So we've tied in the flower-like quality to the effect that it has on the audience, because we've linked it now to relevant context. Furthermore, death is personified here to show Capulet's distress at his loss and to dramatise his emotions. Shakespeare purposely, so again, just mentioning the author's name here really kind of secures your comment on the intention. Presents Capulet as a father who feels both he and a future son-in-law have been cheated by death and robbed of a prize. This would be an idea that was not only acknowledged but understood by an Elizabethan audience, yet to a modern audience it calls into question the role of women in a patriarchal society. So we've brought in the effect on the two different audiences that we have. You won't always have two different audiences depending on the year that the play was written, but also it brings back in this idea of patriarchal society, which is the context that we have up here, women being possessions. So we've tied them in together. And then let's see what the third step is. The fact that Juliet is now lost to both men could be Shakespeare's way of suggesting that such extreme patriarchal control is still not powerful enough to overcome love. So we've ended it with tying in expertly Shakespeare's intention. And all of this is linked together. So if we didn't have this comment on patriarchal control and the role of women and the Elizabethan audience, then we wouldn't really be able to get right down there to what Shakespeare's intention is. So here we have quite a secure three-step approach to linking context, the effect on the audience, and your author intention. And finally, error example 3. Now this one works well if you are responding to an unseen text, or if the text that you are responding to doesn't really have any valid contextual references. So this is an example of an unseen response to poetry, and this is Ted Hughes' Hawk Roosting. Again, this is partway through the essay. In addition, the use of the word inspection reinforces the authority of the hawk, as it not only has dominion over all it sees, but it has the power to inspect it as well. it could be argued that the hawk is a creature that not only sets the standards but judges them too. This interpretation further supports the idea that the human world, the world occupied by the reader, is also inferior to the hawk's. In stanza 3, the speaker observes that it holds all of creation in its foot. The repeated reference to feet in this stanza links back to stanza 1 and helps the reader to understand the violence of the hawk. Hughes effectively shows us the violence of the hawk through these examples. Okay, so we have some reference to the reader, but it's a little bit vague and it's a little bit underdeveloped. And then we have repetition between the effect on the reader and us understanding the violence, and Hughes effectively showing us the violence. So we're basically saying the same thing. So lots of repetition here, and it's a bit vague through these examples. So let's see how we've used the two-step approach here of author intention, effect on the reader, to just make this a little bit clearer. So we've developed the effect on the audience, or the reader here, by linking to author intention. We've thought about the big ideas. Now, the big ideas are the ideas that the writer is trying to convey to you. And also the different things that they want you to think about, either if it's about society, or if it's about religion, or if it's about life, or it's about personal issues. It's the big ideas that come from this poem, what we're supposed to understand, what we're supposed to learn, what they're alluding to. Again, use the author's name throughout. Think about what the reader is supposed to think, feel, do, how should they react, and then make a specific link to the effect on the reader. Make clear transitions between your ideas by repeating key words, but also using them to develop further. So let's go down to where we've made this better. It could be argued that Hughes is suggesting that the hawk is a creature that not only sets the standards, but judges them too. So we've got now what Hughes is suggesting. So we've linked now to a big idea, we've used his name, which shows that we're linking to his intention, what he's trying to show us. This interpretation further supports the idea that the human world, the world occupied by the reader, is also inferior to the hawk's. Hughes continues to explore the idea of the hawk's superior and egotistical nature in stanza 3, when the speaker observes that it holds all of creation in its foot. So we've now kind of transitioned, we've repeated the key ideas, the key phrases, and we've transitioned to show how the author's intention is developed, but also we're linking it to something concrete. We're linking it to evidence as well. Again, just because this is a link, if you are using peel or petal paragraphs, does not mean it has to come at the end. The repeated reference to feet in the stanza forces the reader to recall the image of hook feet in stanza 1. So now it's a much more specific link to what we're doing as readers, what we're being forced to do by Hughes. And we are reminded of the power and violence of this dominant body part. So now the effect on the reader is much more purposeful, much more focused. So my final top tips for you. Link your comment on context, author intention, or effect on the reader to your analysis, to your point, or back to the essay question, just so that it's centered in that paragraph or your essay. It's not floating, it doesn't seem irrelevant or vague. Think about what the context adds or helps you to understand. What does it add to what you've already noticed, what you've already said? Think about the big ideas of a text when thinking about the author's intention. What's their message? Why did they write this? What do they want the reader or the audience to understand, think, feel? And you can also link it back to the themes. When trying to discuss the effect on the reader or the audience, consider what would their reactions be? What would their thoughts be? Think about their feelings. Who are the intended and the actual readers or audience? For example, when we looked at Shakespeare, we were obviously not the people that he was writing for, so we may react or view things in a different way. Does this make a difference to how they react or how they view a text? Most likely it does, so show that you've considered that. Use the author's name throughout your essay as a way of acknowledging or homing in on their intention and message. Think about what the author is trying to do, so think about these verbs that you can maybe use throughout your essay. Are they trying to critique something? Are they highlighting? Are they subverting? Are they suggesting, exploring, challenging, attacking, amplifying? Consider all of these different verbs and they will help you with your intention and also with the author's message. Do not forget the form, because this will help you to know if you're talking about a reader or if you're talking about an audience. And follow the 2- and 3-step approach as a way of combining these elements and developing your response further. By all means, you can use all of these tips to just talk about one thing at once. But if you want to extend your response, then you can join them together wherever it's appropriate. So I've just summarised the different steps that I've been through here at the bottom. You've got your two-step approach for context and author intention or message, your two-step approach for effect on the reader and author intention if the context isn't relevant or if you're responding to an unseen text. And then you've got your three-step approach. If you do know the context, you can link context, effect on the reader, and author intention or message. So I hope you've enjoyed this micro lesson on how to include context, author intention, and effect on the reader effectively. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any new content that's posted. Thank you very much. Goodbye.